Torrential rain and mudslides have left thousands of people homeless. And the capital of Caracas and neighboring areas have been hit hard. Much of Venezuela is paralyzed. Most banks, businesses, and government offices are closed. Coming up, we'll tell you where this woman spent the last 2 years of her life and why. But first, a look at the national extended weather forecast. A woman who spent the past 2 years living in a redwood tree is back on solid ground. Julia Butterfly Hill came down from her 18-story high perch after reaching an agreement to save the 600-year-old tree from loggers.
I understand that all of us are governed by different values, and I understand that to some people I'm just a dirty tree-hugging hippie, but I can't imagine being able to take a chainsaw to something like this. I don't understand.
We, in an element to protect her health, I think, is really the reason we're reaching the agreement. She is paying us $50,000 for the tree and for the 200-foot buffer area around the tree. But it is a unique situation.
The 25-year-old lived on a plywood platform under a tarp, had food hoisted to her, and bathed from a bucket. A spokeswoman for Hill says it will take time for her to get used to walking again.
After living in an ancient redwood tree for 2 years, environmental activist Julia Hill has returned to Earth. Don Knapp has more on her unusual effort to save old-growth forests.
Julia Butterfly Hill finally came down. More than 2 years after she climbed this 600-year-old redwood she calls Luna to defend it with her life. Despite Northern California's cold, wet winters, nearby logging and threatening helicopters, the protest Hill thought might last a month stretched out for 738 days. Now it's ended with environmentalists agreeing to pay Pacific Lumber $50,000 for the tree and a buffer zone.
Well, I think the key part of our reaching this decision is her own safety. She has been up there 2 years. We're approaching another severe winter. We're concerned about her health and welfare, as we have been from the very beginning.
Life is a never-ending lesson of letting go.
Hill has won a small battle in a long, hard war to save some of the last remaining privately owned ancient redwoods. Last March, state and federal governments agreed to pay $480 million to Maxam Corporation, owner of the Headwaters Forest, to save it from logging. But environmentalists protested the deal, claiming it was too much money for too few trees and failed to protect other old-growth forests.
To some people, I'm just a dirty tree-hugging hippie. But I can't imagine being able to take a chainsaw to something like this. I think before anyone should ever be allowed to cut down trees like this, they should be mandated to live in it for 2 years.
Hill says her tree sit convinced her to lead a life of service. But for now, she's just enjoying small physical pleasures, like the feel of cold mud on her bare feet.
God, it feels so good to be alive on this earth.
Don Knapp, CNN.
Her name is Butterfly, but it's not flowers she loves, it's trees.
Tonight, this activist is explaining why she's finally coming down after 2 years sitting at the top of a tree. She lived in a tree for 2 years in a personal crusade to save ancient redwoods. Now, Julia Hill has set foot on solid ground once again after winning a partial victory.
For 738 days, this 25-year-old woman refused to leave her perch, hoping to stop Pacific Lumber from harvesting old-growth redwood trees. The company wouldn't do that, but it finally agreed to spare the 600-year-old tree Julia Hill occupied, along with a 200-foot buffer zone around it. Overcome with emotion as she reached solid ground once again, Julia felt her quest was not in vain.
Oh, we did it. We did it. Oh, my God.
For 2 years, she braved the elements, sleeping under a tarp on an 8-foot-wide plywood platform. She bathed using a bucket. Food and supplies were hauled up by rope. Television crews from around the world visited her.
I think before anyone should ever be allowed to cut down trees like this, they should be mandated to live in it for 2 years.
The clear cutting of old redwood forest leaves the land looking like this. The practice is legal, and it will continue.
All the companies, including Pacific Lumber Company, live up to the law and the regulations and do it in a very, very good way.
But last year, Pacific Lumber's license was suspended when it violated state regulations. Julia and her supporters will pay Pacific Lumber $50,000 in lost logging revenue as part of the agreement to preserve the tree and the immediate area. Hers was a long and lonely ordeal, but Julia Hill's voice was heard around the world.
But I've done everything I know in these 2 years to share it with people so that we can have a world one day where a person doesn't have to live in an ancient tree for 2 years for it to be protected.
In March, Pacific Lumber signed an agreement with the state and federal governments to turn 10,000 acres of forest into a public preserve. The company will donate Julia's $50,000 to forestry studies.